3 p.m. for the Water and Wastewater Utilities Committee meeting. Agenda item number 1, water buffer model policy review.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm sure as you've anticipated this discussion, we came with some items to share. We included as a link in the packet a copy of the most recent staff report and backup information that went to the board this past February. As you recall, in February, the board took action to proceed with the release of the additional water unit that was called for under the policy, but then directed this committee to, and I'm paraphrasing here, to review the policy and the assumptions used within to determine if in fact some changes could be made or should be made that would relax or eliminate some elements that might be quote unquote overly conservative within the policy. Again, just there's a report here and whatnot, but I think you're probably most familiar with, you know, this chart, which we've been updating now for about a decade each year, and the policy feeds a model. This chart is the results of that model. The model is used to predict the district's water supply, and I think I first want to say the policy is called the water supply buffer policy. The buffer is based on supply, not demand. So the buffer, that 20% buffer that's contained within the policy, is off the supply side. And in this chart, that is reflected by the top bold line. So that is you go back in time and look forward in time, you can see the predicted water supply. The year that we're in right now, this year right here, we have a predicted supply of 2,135 acre feet. The contents of the policy essentially are on the demand side, take the prior 12 years of water production, we use different terms here, but production and consumption. Production meaning how much water we pumped at the wells to meet the demands of the district's customers. There is some water that's used that it doesn't go through a meter at a customer side, like sort of system water, I'll say. You might call it water loss. In our case, most of this is not lost water. It's water used intentionally to flush wells, to do system flushing, those kinds of things. And that's why there's a difference in this kind of shaded purple area. That's really the difference between the metered water at the customer's connections and the metered water at the wells. And the difference here is this sort of system use. Water loss is another term for it in the industry. Again, it's not a very good term in my view because it's not necessarily lost water. We don't have a big problem with that we're aware of with water that is actually leaked out of the system or not otherwise captured. Then the model uses data to predict the future demands of unconnected water units. Some of these may actually be physically connected but are not in use. So meters that are where there's no development, where there's a meter and no developments, so it's not reflective of its long-term demand. Or in our case, we have quite a few virtual meter agreements, and they're billed like there's a meter, there is no meter, and there is no use. And I think this is probably the area that we're going to focus on mostly today. Is this component? So after the board made the recommendation or request that this committee review this, and then it came back initially, I think in early March or maybe late February when we were first discussing the strategic plan items for water. There was a reiteration of the request to go ahead and have this discussion. At that time, staff or myself, Justin Black and Lori Azim kind of met. We said, okay, look, just so we're ready and we're on the same page, what do we think the options are going forward? And so I created some notes after that meeting. It's not really set up in a staff report format, so I didn't produce copies of it for you. And there's items that can be further fleshed out, but I wanted to just review what we had talked about. That was back in March. and to see if there are some of these elements that you would like to consider further. So first, again, the policy is based on the supply portfolio, not on the buffer, not on predicted demand. Just as sort of that's the way it's been since this was originally developed back in 2016. The buffer, the 20% buffer was originally recommended at 25%. But when the policy was adopted in 2016, it was reduced by the board and this committee. You weren't on the committee, but the committee existed to 20%. And I just want to point out that we have somewhat of a complicated water supply portfolio, in that it's great to have various sources. We have, discharged treated wastewater. We have discharged Nacimiento water. We have licensed water. We have permit water. And all of those sources are very specific about when we can use them relative to the time we accept them, because they have to travel underground. And we capture all this information on a sort of a month-by-month basis. And so it's not quote unquote stored water. It's we discharge the water, and then we can pick it up in these given times. In the permit water and the licensed water is actually it's very specific. It's regulated by the state of California. We have our permit water, which is being converted to a license hopefully very soon, is really an October through March, extendable through early May period. That's about 500 acre feet source of water, but is not available to us at all during our peak summer months. We have a Greer license that the district obtained many years ago that's available sort of almost on the opposite schedule in the summer months, but not available to us in the winter months. So not all sources of water are equal. Our deep water, our water that's in the what we will term the Atascadero Basin aquifer, that it has a safe yield of 1,040 acre feet a year. That really is quite flexible, and that is more or less stored. That safe yield figure does allow for some instances of, like, you could exceed the pumping 1 year, and as long as you use less, like in the following years, so that sort of safe yield in a true emergency, the district could use a little bit more than that, provided we use less in future years and took an average of no more than 1,040 acre feet. And that's actually the source that's probably providing us the biggest portion of this buffer. It's more expensive because the water's deeper in the ground. There's other concerns about the sources of that water. There's arsenic in some of the wells, and some other well locations have other constituents of concern that make it less desirable for us to utilize. So considering all of those limitations, of the options available, the reduction of the supply buffer percentage, I think would present of the options I'll present to you or discuss with you, present a greater long-term risk to the district. If you could certainly, it's your call, it's the board's the policy here. You could reduce it, but I think it would present the greatest long-term risk for the district. And I don't want to say it's a great long-term risk, just greater than some other options that we have available to you. It does also make it quite difficult to compare whether our 20% buffer is appropriate if you look at other agencies' supply buffer, because we all have different circumstances. The fact that we've got these water sources from various locations that have various restrictions, it isn't like this water's in a savings account that we can go grab. It's got to be used at the appropriate time. But you do have the ability, totally 100% within your decision-making authority, to alter that buffer percentage. You could say no, from this day forward, we're going to make it 15%, and that would free up water. The next option or point that I wanted to raise is really on the third policy point within the district's policy. So right now you've got the supply. This was included here, but the supply buffer policy. The third point, or the third item, states the district shall not release water units until available supply reliability is proven. And in hindsight, that may be that term or that sentence may lack clarity or may be interpreted differently by different persons. I will say that at the staff level, historically, we've interpreted this pretty literally, and that, as an example, even though we have a 406 acre foot subscription to Nacimiento Water, we have not included that in our supply portfolio or all of it in our supply portfolio, because we haven't felt that that water is truly available to us at this time. Right now, we're utilizing a shared resource out at the Selby site. There isn't capacity to take 406 acre feet there. The concept of relocating that turnout to the Creekside site and developing a project there that would allow us to utilize all of it exists. We've acquired the property, and now we're in the design phase of the turnout pipe, but we've not included that in the supply that's for 2025, because we haven't felt that it's available. Now, I believe it will be available in the future, and the board could tell us that staff is being overly conservative by delaying the forecast of that water I go back and forth here. In this chart, we've essentially pushed off that water several years out. It's still in the forecast. This happens to be that incremental growth of that source of water, but it's in the out years, and so therefore this model doesn't calculate or doesn't predict that the water is available in the current year, and so therefore it didn't recommend or show that there was additional units associated with that source of water. But you could tell us that that's too conservative, it's too strict, that there isn't that barrier should not exist, and therefore we should include it. So that option does exist. I would say that there are some barriers there that we would need to overcome, and that not everything is a certainty. We have a conceptual design for this turnout. We have a conceptual design and layout for the treatment system. We've got tentative approval from the state to operate this system based on certain assumptions about treatment requirements, et cetera. But we don't yet have an easement or right of way for that Nacimiento turnout. We have not conducted the environmental determinations to relocate the turnout and to do the work on the site, et cetera. So there are a few hurdles there that I think are real. The board or this committee, and then later the board could determine if we're being too conservative. So I think that this option would have less long-term risk than the first one that I mentioned, the reduction of the actual buffer percentage, but it would increase short-term risk if it was interpreted differently. And then, it depends on how we would view if there were policy changes or if the policy were interpreted differently long-term, if that might affect other sources of water. It's kind of hard to say what the long-term risks are. I think in this case, the risk would be mostly short-term risks. So those are the two sort of policy points that I think the board or this committee and then ultimately the board could change that would, in both cases, free up more water, but there are some risks associated. There are also a couple of assumptions that are not laid out in the policy specifically, but are used as background data that produces this model. And I'll go through those two that we identified. And then of course I want to make sure we have time for your questions. So the two issues, so the first issue is how we calculate the reserved water for unconnected water meters. Unconnected, or in some cases connected but not in use. Zero use virtual meter. For this purpose, they're all the same. Currently, the way the assumptions work is we track and we list in this staff report a detailed listing of each. And it also applies to purchase agreement. So there's a detailed listing of the units that are associated with water purchase agreements and then outstanding units. And in each case, we specify the allocation that based on the time of the year that they were purchased. We have some water units that were purchased way back like in the eighties and early nineties that are still not utilized, many of which are associated with virtual meter agreements. And so we have broken those down by 300 gallon per day units, 430 gallon per day units, and 575 gallon per day units. Now for just so you're on the same page as staff is, for residential purposes, the district makes no distinction between those unit sizes. If a builder is gonna build a 10-unit apartment complex, they can assign 10 300 gallon per day meters. They can assign 10 575 gallon per day meters. Same thing with a 10-unit housing development. So any meter size, any water unit size works for residential development. For commercial development, it's a little bit different, or maybe a lot different. In those cases, the developer will attempt to match the water use to the amount of water that's available in most cases, and really try to maximize the amount of water. So if they had 10 300 gallon per day units on a parcel, that would be equivalent to 3,000 gallons a day on average over a course of a year in demand. And if they had 10 575 gallons per day, gallon per day units, that'd be 5,750 gallons per day, almost double the amount of water that's available to the parcel. And I mean, our history has sort of shown that on the commercial side, the developers try to maximize the amount of potential use of that water. That's not always the case, but often the case. And try to develop a project that utilizes the resource fully. So I think there's been some comments and some discussion by the committee in the past and also by our board about could we just reduce that amount. 575 is probably too high of a figure for residential development. And could we revise that, what I'll call reservation of water in the model for all the 575 gallon units, some of the 575 gallon units? So here's our thoughts on that. Yes, we could do those things. However, we do not know where or how the outstanding units will be utilized. We could map and identify where those units are, what parcels they're associated with. And you could actually even tie that to zoning, but that is subject to change. I mean, a property could be zoned a residential today and then in a future timeframe could change to some sort of commercial development. There obviously could be properties that are in a sort of a mixed use sites or potentially facilitate mixed use development where it's difficult to determine how many of the water meters would be constructed or tied into residential development versus commercial development. So you still, again, if this is the direction that the committee wished to proceed with and the board ultimately approved, we could mathematically reduce those calculations. We felt that there are short to medium term risks here. There might be some limited long-term risks as over time we expect there to be fewer outstanding units. Once the district is able to satisfy the wait list, there's little reason for property owners to purchase units and sit on them going forward, because it will not be a restricted resource or a limited resource. But we think there would be some short and some maybe medium term risks here. Again, all relative to one another. I don't think if you decided to just reserve them all at 430 gallons at a 575. Again, the math is not that complicated. It could easily be implemented, but we wouldn't know potentially for years down the road how those particular water units were utilized. Some will be some maybe, or many may be utilized to their fullest capacity, particularly again for commercial projects where the developer obviously doesn't want to have to buy additional units and oftentimes tries to design the project to maximize the use of the resource. There's one other assumption or one other item here that I think is worth mentioning in terms of another assumption that's included in the model. And that is, right now, we are not, let me back up just for a second. This may be easier for me to explain when I'm looking at this table. Chart. So, this purple area for existing development, existing parcels that are tied in, connected to the water system. This purple bar represents the collective demand to meet the current needs for this developed area. We're not subtracting out of that purple bar the wastewater that those those tied in developments produce that is ultimately returned to the district as a water supply. But we are increasing the supply side to illustrate or to represent the amount of treated wastewater that is percolated at the Selby site. So this number of this 2135 includes our forecast for percolated wastewater based on the existing development, existing folks tied into the collected wastewater system. It does not forecast either in 2025 or in any of the out years growth of that figure, although most new development will be tied into the wastewater system, and we've had sustained success in treating that wastewater and returning it to the system as a water supply, treated water supply. So another concept is, can we provide some sort of credit for that future connection to the wastewater system, because maybe we're being too conservative by not accounting for that. So let me just try to outline how I've captured this information. Based on the 2018 study, the average equivalent dwelling unit produced a 176 gallons per day of wastewater flows. Now, we get credit for 98% of the wastewater that's deposited at Selby as a water supply. There's a small loss that's attributed to a riparian plant life along the Salinas River. 2% very minor loss that's attributed to it. So we get 98% of what we percolate. Now, there are other gains and losses in the wastewater system. We do lose water to evaporation, and so the 176 gallons isn't a perfect figure, but it is what we have as far as a daily rate per dwelling unit. We also know that currently 77% of water connections, we have just over 3,000, I think 3,009 is the latest published figure, are connected to the district's wastewater system. But just over 2,300 connections to the wastewater system. So just over 3/4 of the existing developments tied to the wastewater system. And probably that number increases over time because the opportunities for use of septic are diminish over time. You've got to have pretty large piece of land to put a septic system in. And so as Templeton becomes more dense, more of that development will be connected or is likely to be connected to the wastewater system. Now, considering those two factors, we could reduce the reservation of water in the model by approximately 133 gallons per day. So we can take, right now we're reserving, again, 300 gallons per day for the 300 gallon per day units, 430 for the 430 and 575. We could reduce all of those by 133 gallons per day, the reservation of water, as an assumed net demand, net of the supply that they would generate. Now, in some cases that's going to be imperfect calculation on a per unit basis, but on average, I think it's as good of a figure as we have. Again, not perfect. There are some losses due to evaporation and some other things that occur. But this change in assumption, if you direct us to, if the board were to consider this information, ultimately, if this is the area that you want to direct us to, we would revise the policy to illustrate how this was done, document it. This change alone would result in the ability to release about 248 water units currently. Because you'd be reserving less. So in other words, this gray bar in the model would be smaller, noticeably smaller, and then 248 units the model would produce a recommendation to release approximately 248 units. This does have some increased short-term risks. The risks are associated with our ability to move, to remove really the current Nacimiento siting at Selby. Again, we're sharing that resource between treated wastewater and Nacimiento water, and the more wastewater we put at Selby has an indirect effect, or maybe direct, depends on the time of year and some other factors of how much Nacimiento water we can place there. So there's some short-term risk because it's assuming that we can relocate that Nacimiento water as the wastewater connections occur. Just keep in mind that new units take several years to actually connect, and our forecast is that we would have Nacimiento water out of there before any of the 248 is likely to connect to the system. It will have no long-term risk provided we're able to do that, actually move that the Nacimiento water, and that project can move forward. It's also based on real data. Again, imperfect data, but better data than the other policy points. So those are the items that we as a staff kind of discussed, and we agreed that probably if the committee wished to proceed with something that moved the needle, that this final point has the least amount of risk, and certainly the least amount of long-term risk, and that's the risk that I'm most concerned about. The short-term risk is not terribly concerning. The long-term risk is.
Jeff, can I say one point on reducing by 133? Some of those units that are reserved for the future might not tie into sewer.
Well, we reduced we reduced it by 77%.
Oh, okay, so
Yeah,
you're
so that
saying
calculation,
only 75% of the future.
that's how 133 is arrived at. So that
Okay.
176, I multiplied it times 98%. So you lose a couple gallons there, and then take that figure, multiply times the 77%. So that's why it's smaller numbers. Yeah, so it kind of accounts for that. So again, that's back to
Assumption that we continue that 77% connection rate. Might go up, might go down. Probably go up.
Probably goes up in the long term from year to year, probably doesn't change much. So those are the four those alternatives. Again, the final one was the one that we felt was the preferred one to pursue. If the committee felt comfortable with revising some of the assumptions and actually kind of, again, removing some of the conservative elements, it has the least impact on the long-term risk. And we've drafted kind of what we would revise the policy to reflect that.
If you did the last one, how many water units?
248,
So that'd be an extra 248.
the big number.
Just for this year.
Just for that.
Just whenever this takes effect. So keep in mind, we released 129 last year, and we've released one more this year, so 130. So it'll be almost double. This actually it's over the last 5 years, we released approximately 200. So it'd be more than we released over the past 5 years. It's pretty difficult to know or determine whether or not it would satisfy the wait list. There are nearly 900 water unit requests still outstanding, but over the past 14 months or so, we've satisfied many. Each unit that was taken satisfied maybe like 7 requested. So if that same acceptance rate occurred going forward, we would reach the bottom of the wait list. But it's impossible to know for sure because there are certainly property owners that are on the wait list that are asking for more than 248 water units.
I'm sorry, when would that exhaust the list?
The timing is also hard to predict because it's somewhat of a slow process, going 30 days at a time. But I mean, it could be done this year. Could be.
if we wanna look at the list, was it attached at the bottom?
It's not, but I can pull it up.
I think it was the
there,
December
it's not
list,
for it.
but the current list is on the website as well.
Yeah, you wanna,
You can kind of get an idea of how many units people are asking for, so if somebody that's on there for 150 takes 150,
Yeah, I-
that's a big portion. That would be taken, so.
so.
We're looking at 133. Is there modeling done lesser amounts? So let's just call it an even 100, like what?
How many units would that create?
Yes.
Well, about 25% less,
So
200.
you want to be conservative.
Yeah,
with
you wanna be-
buffer.
Yeah, I mean, you can, the reason we arrived at this is because there's real data that supports it. It's not perfect data, but it's better than anything else we've got. But we believe, that each unit, when people buy a sewer unit, it's equal to 176 gallons a day. So here's the current wait list.
Yeah,
So, we've got some folks that are requesting big numbers, and so you won't really know until we get through some of these big numbers, how far down we're gonna get. But, I mean, I added, if it was 248, we would get, just the initial offering would satisfy, like down to Shangri-La, like this first set. Let me highlight it here, but, and then, that group. Then you'd know after about 45 days, how many were accepted, how many payment plans were entered into, and then we'd release another batch. And it would go on like that. But there are a number of parcels that are asking for some big number of units, like this Elizabeth Nelson. I think this lady's passed away, but 200 units are requested there.
you got that whole.
Yeah. We've got 150 requested by Correa, but I think he's kind of given up on, not likely to do any significant development on his site. And certainly that's kind of a lowest number, but.
We've found the economy definitely is affecting these people's motivation to accept. Cause there is a timelines to actually do something with the units associated with the payment plans. So they actually have to do something on the property within a reasonable amount of time, so it's not just the purchase. So I've spoken to a couple people on the list, and some of them aren't going to take the full amount. But until
Hard to-
until it's offered,
They don't have to decide, right? They don't have to, till push comes to shove, they're just holding their breath. Everyone's waiting their turn. So, I mean, I think there's a better than 50-50 chance that the 248 units would satisfy the remaining part of the wait list, but I don't know. We could only it's possible we only get halfway through it. So you don't really know until we're out there. This past year, we satisfied about 1,000 units on the wait list. We had 1,900, I think, were on the wait that were requested as 14 months ago, and now we have 800 and some. So and some of those have put themselves back on. Yeah. So like this bottom of this list, for the most part, these folks here were offered units. They didn't accept them and put themselves back on the wait list. So they may be offered units again, and it's the same thing might occur.
there's two people that want to do lot splits that weren't
there.
the Tishlini property and the vineyard. One at the very bottom.
So, but the others were offered, like they were offered units. This one here put themselves on the wait list a couple years ago, but
That one,
they might be resolved by now or soon. So, yeah, I think there's, I think we have all the evidence in the world to show that this is, this 876 is not a reliable number. Yes, it's what's on the wait list, but they will not all be taken. So, I took the time back in March to sort of draft what the revised kind of policy statement would read if you wanted to go this route. And it reads, the amount of water reserved for outstanding units shall be calculated by using the number the allocation of water units assigned to their respective unit, 300, 430, or 575 gallons per day, applicable at the time the unit was assigned to the parcel, less the expected increase in water supply availability due to treated wastewater once connected. To calculate the expected increase, the estimate of wastewater created per EDU, which is currently 176, is multiplied by the amount of supply that can be retrieved relative to the amount percolated treated wastewater, currently 98%, which together is multiplied by the percentage of water connections that are served by the wastewater system, again, currently 77%. As of 2025, this figure is 133 gallons per day. So it could still be dynamic if we go through the wastewater. We're expected to get revised, wastewater discharge amounts per dwelling unit as a part of the master plan effort. So if that figure were to change, this could be dynamic and whatnot. There could be some, it could be altered. But
Now, that policy is if we did what again? I'm sorry.
that policy is if you want to move forward with this sort of fourth alternative.
Summary, a wastewater credit for all those units that are yet to be tied in.
Well, I would like to thank you for all the work you've done on this, and the same for Ray and Justin. I'm pretty conservative when it comes to stuff like this. But I think there's a faction on the board that really, for whatever reason, I don't know, wants to sell or get rid of water units really fast. I'd be willing to make the recommendation that we go with the unit, your fourth option. And then just wait and see till everything else that we've got planned comes to fruition. I don't know, Becky, as I have even waited on that, but I think that, I'm not sure how the vote on the board's gonna go. I have an idea, but, you know, again, I think I'd be willing to go with that fourth option, make that recommendation. And I don't know really how to say this because I'm not a word person, but I would kind of like when it goes to the board that you state up front or somewhere in the positive that staff is recommending this or is against this for this reason versus I understand it a lot better now than when I went through this a few times when I was reading it. The figures really couldn't see where you were kind of coming from. And what concerned me with the recommendation was all I saw was, and only because I'm stupid, but all I saw was we had one water unit. We're gonna.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, this wasn't in the stuff that we had in February, right? This is something that, you know, after the board considered that, and you know, I guess the way I would put it is, and again, it's just, I don't want to speak for myself, but of the four alternatives that we kind of developed internally, this is the one that presents the least long-term concern to me. It doesn't keep me up at night.
I would like to see that in writing when it goes to the board. You know, because again, you guys are the staff. Everybody on the board is in agreement that you guys are all good, great. So then there's nobody on the board that really can stand up and argue with any of you, you know, other than little stuff. But I think it needs to be shown that that's where the board stands, or the staff stands. So, and I pretty much 90% of the time will lean towards going with what staff wants. Unless it's just.
I think my only concern with it per se is that there is risk. And even though we look at minimize the risk at 133, if we do incremental changes to, like, let's say 100, then we have less risk that can be reevaluated at a future date. It'd be far more difficult to subtract from individuals than it would be to do additional.
So one, I agree with you. I think from my perspective, if you just take the really huge picture, if you were to reduce just the buffer percentage from like 20 to 15, going back later on is going to be challenging because you're going to have already released water units that consume that. So that or made them available. So I think, you know, growing the buffer will be difficult. And so I agree from that point of view that it's easier to, you know, dip your toes in the water and then take a deeper step in if you're ready to later on than going backwards. That said, I think all of this is fairly short term.
Okay.
Because quite honestly, if we are able to satisfy the whole wait list, we reduce the need for property owners to obtain water rights before they're ready to build is nearly eliminated. Nowhere else, do people come and pay their water impact fees 5 years before they develop their project. They go through the entitlement process, and when it's time to build, they pull the building permit and pay the impact fees, and never before. Here, because of this shortage, this need, and the county really won't even accept an application for a project unless they can prove that they have these rights to water. And so it's created this demand prematurely. That's why we have all these outstanding units that are not yet in use. If we can get to a spot where units are available over the counter, then over time, these should be absorbed into the system and fewer should be quote unquote pre-purchased. There's little motivation to do so because it will be available when you're ready. As a matter of fact, I guess we'll cross that bridge when we get there in terms of what other changes might you make. If we had no more wait list, I think we would end up coming back and doing some wholesale changes to the water code for various reasons to prohibit this sort of banking of a resource prematurely. So because essentially some of these property owners have been able to kind of cannibalize this limited resource, which has prevented others from accessing it. And so I think that's part of the motivation. Yeah, I don't want to speak for any of the board members, but as I understand that may be part of the motivation. And quite honestly, I think I've seen that for a long time, but we were never in a spot, I mean, really until last year to make a real dent on this thing, right? You know, we had released 20 units, 30 units, 25 units, and we were making small dents, but there was still this huge 2,000 unit demand. And I was unable to, I've always viewed the figure as kind of bogus, whether it's 1,900 or 800, it's not a very accurate prediction of what people are going to really take. But until you had a sizable amount of water units, it's difficult, or would have been difficult to know how far they would go. And in 2024, when we released 129 units, we made it a long ways. And along the way, we've picked up relinquished units and forfeited units. And those are going to continue to happen. Because of this scarcity of the water units, people have taken, because they don't know when it's going to be available again, they've taken as much as they could possibly use on a piece of property, generally. And then they've sorted out the details as they go. And what they've done is they've come back to us, sometimes just a few months later, and say, you know what, now that we've consulted with the county, or now that I got a planner involved, I can't use 4 units on my property, I can only use 3, take 1 back, give me a refund. And so we've generated some forfeitures, not a ton, but some forfeitures, and I suspect that that's going to continue to happen based on the 2024 release and earlier releases. And if more units are released, that's going to continue to happen because there's just no point in them paying for this asset if they can never take advantage of it. So again, we had a relinquishment or a forfeiture, I guess I'll use that's a better term, just last week. So we have one additional unit that's been offered, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, so those are going to continue to happen, but probably not in huge voluminous amounts. But I think that in my view, and again, I'm a pretty conservative, especially with stuff like this. We have made, I view, we've made a forever commitment to provide water to a house, a building, whatever. It's a permanent, forever commitment to provide that service. And so I think we have to be cautious and conservative. And so that's when we outline these various options that we developed, I try to categorize the risk based on, the significance of the risk and the length of the risk. And again, it's that long-term risk that concerns me the most, because I won't be here when it's realized. You won't be here when it's realized, but we'll be blamed for it. Because I certainly blame some of my predecessors for the no, I just think it's just I think the most important thing is to minimize the long-term risk.
Yeah, there it was.
I mean, if the staff is comfortable with it, that 133 number, then we feel that it's conservative enough that we diminish the long-term risk. And that's something that I would approve.
I mean, it's based on real data and you can do the math. It's not just a swag.
Is there, like, you mentioned the option to evaluate it, could we put in the policy that, you know, the 77% that you use, for example, could be evaluated year on year based on how many sewer connections there's?
I mean, I've got it written like it would be, that would happen automatically.
Okay,
Yeah, I've got it written, and I'm just using the current data, but yeah, if those numbers ebb and flow a little bit, it would.
would we be able to also, like, if you're assuming the 176 gallons per day is our sewer equivalent dwelling unit, or how much we expect from like a single family residence, if that is changed,
That's also
If,
written like it would be able to be changed,
yeah, if that's changed with after our master plan, we go through you know, we get that information and that's different for whatever reason, that we can kind of change what is plugged into that.
That's how I think it would work. I mean, that's how I've been taking.
Every year when we do the water buffer, it'll adjust based on new information. You know, how many percentage of tie-ins we have, kind of like a more real prediction of what everything is looking like. Cause you know, the EDU or the equivalent dwelling unit is actually gonna be calculated based on real data that we collect during the master plan process. So I think if we build that in to this recommendation and saying that amount, whatever we want to call it, wastewater credit, is going to be adjusted based on real information over time, then I think.
Yeah, I think you could, again, just back to the fact that if you've already allocated them all, you're not gonna claw them back. It's more like it's gonna result in like maybe a shortage or a lesser reduction going forward. So in other words,
Well,
if
we credited like 1 year and then we adjusted it somehow, the next year it would reflect it in the water buffer
it would, right,
if people haven't tied it.
so I think it's intended to be dynamic. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't see this changing very drastically, you know, certainly on the short term, right? Cause that 77% might just go up and might go
Right,
down
yeah.
ever so slightly or something.
That's true. Unless we decide to do very large sewer.
Yeah, so if that's the committee's recommendation, and we can then I could, you know, I didn't provide you this hand, just my notes of those points, but I can turn that into kind of a staff report that goes through what you evaluated and then this final preferred alternative and I can, you know, kind of even label this, kind of make it more clear that it's intended to be kind of updated, these calculations be updated annually. I mean, the whole model's updated annually, so there's really no reason.
Yeah, but it's like it's different than saying we're just gonna use 133.
No, it doesn't say that.
And then we have the option
And
to.
you're gonna see it in a couple months, so.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, it's intended to be altered as better information becomes available. So, and then again, over time, I don't think this has, in the very long term, has any impact on the 20%.
Okay. And that would be my recommendation. No, so.
That means, Chuck, you get to type that staff report out.
We'll see.
I feel it coming my direction.
No, I already wrote it all, so I mean, I just have to
Yeah,
put it
I
in
mean,
the right
you
format.
presented it very well. I think you got the gist.
Let's see, oops, I shouldn't have done that. Yeah, very, I guess you're right.
Yeah.
Painful.
30 minutes to get it all set up.
You broke it?
Yes,
Somebody did it, but it wasn't me.
Carrie broke the internet.
I haven't been here.
Terry broke it. Well, that's why.
I'm gonna say it was fire. They use it a lot.
I think-
and things
okay.
like that. I've been having some weird stuff with my computer. Maybe it's.
So that's item number one. I think the soonest this would go to the board would be in June.
First meeting in June, maybe second.
The soonest would be June.
Soonest.
Item number 2 is the 2024 Consumer Confidence Report.
Let's see how long this takes to load. So maybe while this is loading, the Consumer Commerce Report's a report that we're required to provide to our customers annually. And Justin, this is on this agenda because it's very fresh. We just created it. It needs to be in customers' hands by the end of the fiscal year. And our notification of this report will go in the May utility bill. We provide a customer with notice that this report's available online and a little form if they wish to obtain a hard copy. And that satisfies the state's requirements. But Justin, do you want to walk the committee members through what's contained in the report? By the way, this is subject to a state requirements. It tells us what languages we have to produce it in, what format it has to be in, etc. So it should look if you were in another community, the report would look pretty similar.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. You know, the first and foremost, July 1st is the deadline to complete the CCR and provide it in one way or another to our customers. This is a 2024 draft CCR report. It goes over some definitions, general information about our drinking water. Water purveyors across the state are required, and maybe the more connections that you have or the larger populations you have, you may use different versions of the CCR, but ours is a pretty straightforward, simplistic version of the customer confidence report. There are a number of constituents you'll find in these tables. And those constituents are supposed to be representative of our system throughout the year, across the board. And so one of the factors in preparing this is the percentage that each one of our sites produces, our production back to our water production. There is, for instance, more production had at our Smith well, for instance, or our Creekside River compared to some of our deeper wells. And so it's factored into the CCR report is by percentage, those constituents go up or down depending on where we got that water from. If it was from a shallower resource or if it was from a deeper resource. So most of all of these dates have been updated with 2024. I'll just point out in table 2 under lead.
So first, table 1 is
Sure.
the alarming one. If we had bacteria in the water, you'd be hearing about oil notice requirements and those kinds of things
Just like recently happened.
Correct.
Absolutely.
So that's highlight. That's why that's listed first. And we had 0 responses.
I
So
actually heard something about that all the systems that actually were distributing the water didn't test positive. It was just.
the source water.
See,
It was
of
worse, yes.
It just,
so, yeah, luckily no incidences there. In table number 2 for lead and copper, we're required to sample every 3 years for lead and copper. We do that throughout the community. And so you'll still see those numbers, those values for lead and copper from 2023. The rest of the constituents are all updated from 2024. Our sites are sampled. A large number of the constituents are sampled every 3 years. We have enough sites that, you know, this well you're sampling it every year. You're sampling a more robust sampling testing regimen, so that for the most part, every year you should be updating all of these different constituents in your CCR. So, you know, if nothing else, I wanted to provide an opportunity if you had any questions in reviewing some of this data. But one of our takeaways this year was that TDS, total dissolved solids, had upticked to 812, and that was largely due to a October sampling at one of our larger Creekside River, one of our larger production sites. And I wanted to connect this with some of our strategic planning that's been going on recently and updating our monitoring and sampling plan that we have before us. We've started to do that. And one of those things is to really look at where we're going to sample for the year and not looking necessarily for the best results, when to sample and to get the lowest value possible, but when is it most representative of that location and trying to sample it during that time. So we're getting values and providing information to our customers that's most relevant, most connected to the water that they're drinking. And so you may see this year that TDS uptick. You may see it next year. You may see it to actually be reduced. And I think we had an outlier sampling last October. Unfortunately, once that sampling takes place and that goes into the system, it's in the system. You can't get it back. And so we won't test that site for another 3 years, but we'll be testing other sites informally, just for our own information. We've gone back to that site and we are sampling it, find out how it changes, that value changes at that location through the year. And again, just trying to solidify a new monitoring sampling program for the future. And just trying to.
It's also an important constituent to raise because you're gonna hear a lot about TDS as we talk about wastewater requirements. And I think it's a good reminder to show, as you've probably heard us say before, our source water is already at the threshold of what our treated wastewater needs to be in the future. We do have high TDS source water, and this CCR shows it rising. It probably doesn't mean that the TDS that you drink went up very much, but because of that sample anomaly, the calculation did. But we have high TDS wastewater. The other thing I will want to point out, things that we get calls, customer calls or inquiries about. And normally they're about how do I set my water softener? And this report does show the hardness or the grains, because this is some information that you would, if you have a water softener, would enter into your water softener to help it determine how frequently it has to recharge. And again, this also will vary over time. Some of our water supplies are harder than others, and some of those we use just sort of say summertime only, primarily. So this is not necessarily reflective of what you might get at your house year round, but on average, it's probably pretty close. So that's something that customers kind of look for. But we do have, that TDS figure, I don't want to call it alarming. I would call it concerning. That's what I looked at when I saw the report. Because look, we've got a maximum contaminant level of 1,000, and we're 81% there. And this has been normally in the high 600s, low 700s.
Unfortunately, we don't have the lab results back from FGL just yet. I was just talking to our senior operator, and although those samples have been turned in and they're running analysis, we just don't have the report yet. But I suspect it's dropped down considerably since October. So
this is just for information only. This is now publicly available. It's on our website, and all of our customers will receive a little flyer in the utility bill, letting them know that this is available online, and asking if they'd like a hard copy, either mailed to them or they can pick it up here. We don't get a lot of requests for those. Oops.
Item number 3, cross-connection control plan compliance.
So Justin put together a short presentation on this and, so go for it.
Yeah, another exciting topic. Cross connection control, plan. This is another, recent requirement from our, regulatory, agencies. And, we weren't sure what this was gonna result in for us. I think we have a better idea now and wanted to update you. This was also part of our strategic planning, just update you in what's transpired recently, what's our understanding now and how we're moving forward. Recently got with the Division of Drinking Water and their objective with this new plan is to protect public health. And that is, at these backflow devices, you'll see the picture. There's more pictures, throughout the presentation. Exciting, stuff. Yeah, looking to limit the risk, of contamination of our drinking water at the, and so then these devices, backflow devices are installed at various, locations. And part of this plan is gonna be risk assessments, hazard assessments, of these, sites. And we'll go through that, shortly.
Generally, you'll notice that you probably see something similar to this in front of all commercial facilities. Any site that has two or more water sources, or water supplies, like if you have a site that has two meters and then that has the potential of flushing back into the system, there's a backflow prevention device. On all fire protection systems have a backflow prevention device, but most single-family residential properties do not. We do require it for any property that has a well on site. Again, and that's part of this risk assessment is how compliant are folks.
Absolutely. Something, few notes here. The cross connection control policy handbook. This replaces, water code, currently for Templeton, as in Templeton's water code. Right now, we've been, operating under Title 17. Title 17 was repealed in October 2024. And now, in its place is the policy handbook. That policy handbook is just elaborates, it's more extensive than the, prior Title 17. So, it adds certification standards, certification of testers and specialists, clarifies, hazard assessment requirements. There's a large number, 13 different elements here in the plan that we're gonna make good on, but the hazard assessment process, time frame, and the legal authority, items number 2 and number 3 they're really where the DEW is, we're spending most of our time. Other water purveyors are spending their time in how we're gonna go about doing these hazard assessments. That's really where there's the work to be done is in these hazard assessments. And then to, I guess, a lesser extent, probably just modifying our ordinance, our water code, so that we are abiding by the policy handbook rather than the Title 17. Fine. So the hazard assessments, this is the largest factor, the largest element. The most work is involved in these hazard assessments. They're similar to the existing program surveys that we already have in place in Title 17. But there's some differences. It spells out that a coordinator and a specialist is required at this time. And so San Luis Obispo County is our program, and for the most part, they're our program administrator. They're noted as our coordinator. And so as I have been starting to draft our plan, we have a template and we've been starting to draft our Templeton's plan. We're noting that the county continues to serve in that role, as well as noting that they would be our specialists as well. And so that's the difference between the Title 17 and the policy handbook, is the requirement for a specialist. And that specialist is also overseeing how the hazard assessments are performed. I'll say that the staff with the county said they do not have the time. They're one person. They do not have the time to perform hazard assessments through all of the different agencies that they are working for at every site. And so what we're gonna be putting together, I think for the here and now, is that staff perform those surveys by direction in accordance with the specialists. And so we'll be working closely with the county. But we're gonna be doing it in a feasible manner. And so we have just over 3,000 connections, and we're not gonna be able to get to them, next year. We have few resources, and so we're going to be committing, in a practical sort of way to making good on those hazard assessments. But again, it has to be feasible for the district. So
Just, you want to just so committee members kind of know this, so this big red device you see here is some people refer to as like a double check valve or backflow prevention device. And what it's intended to do is ensure that that water that's on the private side of the meter cannot be somehow pumped back into the system. So, but these devices have, they require inspection and maintenance. And so, right now, we have an agreement with the county where the county essentially is our, performs this service. It's a public health service on the district's behalf, and then we pay the county to do that work. So, and then we in turn bill the customers that have these devices for their participation in the program. But yeah, you can see, and this is kind of obvious. See, this device here, I'm just gonna assume for just a second that this valve failed at one point in time, and that's why it's a slightly different color, and a new one was put in.
I will note that the county sometimes will just say, you hire somebody and give us the report by this time. So sometimes the county also requires these folks to have a third party.
And they don't pay for it?
The property owner would pay for it.
The property owners are.
the county is our administrator. They're overseeing the program, but not necessarily doing the testing. That would be by a third party. That's a
They're overseeing?
What's that?
We do.
Yeah.
We also hired these to do our own facilities.
That is a double check backflow preventer. And so then if there is pressure, a difference, then those checks, those big two canister looking things between the gate valves, those things will slam shut and keep water from contaminating one or the other. Another underneath staff performed surveys, just wanted to mention that during that presentation, we spoke about big picture kind of priorities within your district boundary. So if we're looking at a brewery, maybe we're talking about classifying it as a brewery, the acknowledgement that it's a brewery, and maybe there's wastewater treatment facilities. We're not necessarily maybe going through and pinpointing every hose bib that's on the outside of the building. So this is somewhat fluid, and we're gonna be continuing to have conversations with the DDW. July 1st, we're gonna be turning in our plan, and then after that, there's gonna be some going back and forth and zeroing in on what we're gonna do for our hazard assessments and those sorts of things. Again, trying to be as pragmatic as possible here. So there is interest, I'll just say there is interest by our own staff in becoming specialists as well. They mentioned that advising that to have two specialists, one on staff, may be something that's advantageous for the district, for water purveyors. And so there is interest of our own staff to get certified.
Would that make them more valuable to somebody else? We'd have to raise our salary to get.
No, I mean, it is another certification that you could become a backflow prevention device certified inspector.
Well, I mean, the only reason I ask it is we always have problems with our salaries, hiring people to stay, so.
Not anymore. It's all changed. It's all,
No, nobody's leaving this Friday, Wayne.
yeah, it's all,
Yeah,
It's
blah,
not-
blah, blah.
it's not better in
Next
Texas.
Friday.
It's not better in Texas.
No, we have some leaving Friday.
Okay,
Um, So-
Well, and I think there's value for a specialist because then we don't have to hire somebody that is a specialist. If the DDW or, these programs require it, they can do it for us.
Yeah, I mean, there's the differences, there's some behind the scenes reporting that needs to take place too, there's program administration.
Yeah, we would have control. We wouldn't have to be dictated by the county and their timeframes. Necessarily legal authority, existing Templeton CSD water code. So we already have a robust water code. Article 6 backflow connection control program. So this is where in some of our existing water code, we would replace Title 17 language to the CCC policy handbook. Backflow prevention devices, backflow prevention protection device installation, hazard assessment surveys, administrative procedures and certification requirements. Again, all of this is, for the most part, it's all in there. It's just gonna be more robust. It's gonna be replaced in the legal authority in our water code. It's gonna be replaced at Title 17 to the cross connection control policy handbook. So as far as the timeline to make cross connection control plan, July 1st, we're gonna hear back from the DDW after some time. They're working through these plans, water purveyor, after water purveyor from our District 6 is down in Carpinteria. But so it's several counties are involved in this review just for our own little district in Carpinteria. So it's gonna take them some time, but to go through these different plans and provide feedback. But so we will, following then, be looking to revise our water code, place some of that language, zero in on exactly what's gonna work for us in these hazard assessments, making them as feasible as possible. And so that we're not getting ahead of ourselves and signing up for something that we can't support. And coordinating with the DDW and SLO County ongoing. Cross connection control plan. Yeah,
Out of
Wow.
curiosity, if we did have staffing who's able to do those inspections themselves, how many do we foresee they can possibly inspect in a given year?
yeah. And so what we were looking to pitch at first is that our staff do the hazard assessments no matter what, but under the direction or the approval from the specialist. And right now, that would be a county staff. Okay, so it would still be our staff that would perform those. I heard different things, NAPOMO throughout, well, maybe we can agree to do 40 a year out of our 4,000. Right, and they were just kind of throwing it out there, but it was interesting to see the DDW's reaction to that. And so I think up front when we're first stating what we're gonna commit to, I think it should be something that we are gonna really be successful with. But I don't wanna, I think it would be in our best interest not to, be too aggressive with these hazard assessments and try and be as pragmatic as possible and wait for the feedback from the DDW. And then maybe we arrive at whatever that's
And
gonna
not every connection presents equal risk to the district.
No.
So there's really very little reason to believe that a single family residential customer has a risk of a cross connection. So that's what, but we do have higher risk locations. We have locations like the hospital or other locations where there are chemical uses, medical uses, multiple connection points where if we don't have effective backflow prevention devices functional and working, that there could be a risk to others. So it's even though we have just over 3,000 connections, they don't all equally present this risk, and it would be not difficult to prioritize the review. not terribly difficult to prioritize.
So once you get somebody that's certified, they're gonna be able to work this into their normal schedule, or we're gonna have to hire somebody else, or how's that work?
Well, we're hoping to, I think we could use, I think when we are, providing this plan to the county, the assumption is that we'd be able to, manage whatever we say that we're gonna do, however many hazard assessments that we say we're going to do. If that is the 40 a year,
40.
that we would be able to do that, with our existing staff. And, by the direction of, the county, coordinator / specialist. You know, if our staff, if we do have a staff that gets backflow certified and is recognized as a specialist, I think it would just be, again, it would lend to a more swift, a quick response and dealing with these hazard assessments, but dealing with the customer, dealing with the prioritization and reporting to the DDW. So, but I think regardless, we're in the plan, we're gonna be covered. And stress that we do these things, we move forward in a pragmatic sort of way so that it is feasible with our limited resources. We only have so many staff. And so, yeah.
Anytime we get rid of the county, I'm all for it.
Cross connection control plan. Carrying.
Item number 4, celebrate local public works and utilities professionals week.
Yeah, I just wanted to share this with the committee. Our utilities folks are gonna be down in San Luis Obispo later on this month. It is a national recognition of public works and utilities professionals week. And so on Thursday, May 22nd, we'll have a couple of staff. We recently got a new hydrant repair vehicle as well, so they'll be taking that down there, setting it up and providing the folks with other outreach information. Yeah, we have pamphlets, brochures, talking about projects coming up, just, you know, interacting with the public. There are a large number of folks that end up going to that are not necessarily from San Luis Obispo. I participated in it, you know, on and off for the last 25 years, and it's a pretty cool opportunity. And I think the staff appreciate it, and they all kind of network and see each other and talk as well. And good way to get the district's name out there. We're doing things, and just the recognition, kind of just the folks seeing us out there in the community. So just wanted to bring it to your attention. And if you want to go by and say hi to one of our,
Or you could just see them in here in town too.
or you could just see them in town too. Thursday night.
So it's part of a national week of recognition.
Do you see as opportunity for recruitment for?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting.
For him or somebody else.
It's interesting participating in these things and just going to local, you know, trainings, workshops and those sorts of things. It's a small world. Everybody talks to each other, and I'm sure it's in other fields as well, but in water, wastewater, everybody gets to know each other and sees each other out there and what's going on. And so I think it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt to be out there for hiring and those sorts of things. Yeah.
Item number 5, water conservation ongoing project.
You want me to?
Sure, Lori led the effort to update our flyers.
We're trying to make our flyers a little more exciting, so we've updated this one. It used to be just like, it used to be kind of a graph of 4 different things with our yellow and whatnot. So we've updated it. If you wanna scroll down, it's highlighting specifically things that aren't triggered by a drought, but like our ongoing requirements for, you know, possibly helping people save water, conserve. Going into the summer, it makes sense that we distribute this, so we're distributing it with the May. We have distributed it.
It's in the, it will be,
Will be
you should receive it about May 28th.
May billing, so just highlighting that, we do not allow irrigation between 10 AM and 6 PM. So irrigating before or after those times, not allowing basically not rinsing off surfaces, washing vehicles so that they go into, or wasting water using a bucket. And yeah, just not, allowing your irrigation to go into the street, those kind of things. So on the flip side of that, we're actually, and utilities guys are supposed to go check on people that are doing this and make sure they know these requirements, reminding. And then on the back, this is kind of a two-sided thing, and on the back, we kind of highlight some things people can do in their own homes. Put a bucket under the shower. So you take that water and then you go water your plants, things like that, take shorter showers. Just the basics that a lot of people already know, and thankfully, as we've seen over the years, we haven't had a crazy amount of increase in water demand. So people are tending to conserve a lot more. So this is just another reminder, hey, adjust your irrigation and whatnot. And so as we go into the year, or maybe possibly next year, if we don't have very wet years, then those requirements associated with drought kind of, they step up these requirements. So then in past, when we've gotten into drier years, we've had people, rotate what day they water on or irrigate on, for example, or have like a restriction on how many days people can irrigate, so things like that. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at. We aren't at I don't know what the latest is on our drought monitor, if we're at.
It's just a dry
We're
condition,
dry condition?
not a level, not a drought level.
Not a drought level that would require us to go into those more stepped up
So, yeah.
requirements.
That's on that drought monitor map that we referenced and you see it around. It's pretty widely recognized, but yeah, our water code
It's in the
does.
water buffer model. We include the drought.
Yeah, but from like February, yeah. Our water code does specify a drought response plan, and there are, depending on how much water we need to save, there are tiers, and it may not be related to a drought at all. The district could also trigger that if we had we had infrastructure problems, like a well failure or something where we needed customers to reduce demand. We could trigger those requirements. They haven't had to since I think about 2016. That was the worst of the drought, those few years there, 15, 16. So.
Oh, and I didn't touch on, we do also note the conservation rebate programs. So folks take out their lawns, replace with water-wise landscaping, or we also have one for, replacing a water softener with a non-salt, like a water treatment option instead of water softeners. And we have those rebate programs. And when we've done those reminders in the past, we've actually had quite a few people come in. So we're continuing that program, and hopefully we'll get some more people this next season. So.
Where's your paint patch? So those are all the planned agenda items. I know in the last meeting, back in April, we had discussed, placing an item at this meeting where we would go tour some facilities. That was the interest amongst Eric Marlowe. But when Eric Marlowe, when we lost that date that we had initially set, and Eric Marlowe was luckily not to come, we didn't put it on this calendar or on this agenda because it was really, I think Eric Marlowe was the one that was most interested. So that's kind of a pending item. If you would like us to, the next committee meeting, we don't recommend setting a date right now, but at the next committee meeting, we can plan that tour, provided Eric Marlowe is able to participate. But I don't have any other items that are anticipated at this
Believe that
time.
Eric would be interested outside of a committee meeting.
I think he's expressed some interest.
Yeah.
You know, if your preference would be to just go ahead and offer that to Eric, separate from the committee, staff can certainly do that, and we can get him to some sites, and that might be helpful for him, particularly as this committee goes into like sort of reviewing progress on the master plan and over the next year and other things. Maybe it would help broaden his understanding of our
I'd be interested
facilities.
in taking another site walk as well, so. I'm gonna set on a calendar, and see if Eric is available at a specific time, if I'm available. It's more important that he actually goes and sees all the sites.
Yeah, I mean, we could do it as part of a committee meeting. So
Okay.
we could, if two of the three of you attended, then it would be a committee meeting anyways.
Oh, okay.
It will be interesting in reaching out as he just started his new job, the new company this week, so it'll be interesting to see his availability.
So we can do one of two ways. We can just set a meeting and find out from Eric when he's available and work around his schedule and get something set up and include the committee members, or just wait until we have a need for another committee meeting and fold that into the mix. It's kind of up to you.
If it's a part of a meeting, would it be public,
It is public, yes.
be recorded, all that?
We've taken minutes.
As
It
we-
wouldn't be on Zoom.
Recorded on
The-
your cell phone.
Yeah, I recorded.
So there were minutes.
But we've done many public meetings at the wastewater plant. It works okay. We don't have a huge following. I've drug a few people all the way out to the compost facility out in Creston before. I need a bigger car. We've taken it.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, great job.
Thank you.
Well,
Adjourn.
thank you.
Right?
Thank you.